Welcome to another episode of Axe of the Blood God, an independent RPG podcast. I'm your host, Kat Bailey. Joining me, as always, my lovely co-host, Nadia Oxford.
Hello, Kat. Are you refreshed from Monday? Because I sure as hell am not.
Refreshed from Monday? Well, I went skiing. I was up at 4 a.m. yesterday, so...
Sounds refreshing.
Yeah,
Tiring, but refreshing.
Yeah, very tiring and refreshing. Also joining me, my equally lovely co-host, Eric Van Allen.
Hello. Hi. If you heard a Discord noise, no, you didn't.
This week we'll be talking about turn-based RPGs. Specifically, are we in a turn-based RPG renaissance? It seems like we might be, giving lie to the old idea that only action RPGs can be popular among mainstream audiences. We'll be getting to that and more, but first, if you enjoy the show, please consider subscribing to us over on Patreon, patreon.com/bloodgodpod. We've just launched a newsletter. We released the premium version of it last Thursday. It's every Thursday, and it has original writing by Nadia, random encounters, and a musical suggestion. bloodgodpod.com is where you can subscribe to it. So go ahead and do that. And Axe of the Blood God will be coming right to your mailbox. We hosted a charity stream on Monday. That was really fun. I believe the VOD should be live now. Eric, is that true?
We're working on getting them live. We got to piecemeal them up and then put them live. But it is happening. It is in the process of happening.
It's happening. Excellent. Yeah, I continued my Nuzlocke run. We played Baldur's Gate 3. We did a speed run of Final Fantasy 16 where we petted Torgal 70 times or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 75 times, something like that.
Excellent. And we played Mario Party Jamboree, where robot Nadia was a legitimate threat. We were very afraid, so...
Nadia turned to Skynet.
I don't even remember that. What did I do?
She became that robot from Superman 3. She got roboticized.
Oh.
But, yes, because he drops, remember?
Right, but I'm trying to think now. The robot from Superman 3, wasn't that Nuclear Man, or was that Superman 4? I think that was Superman 4.
No, that's Superman 4. And Superman 3, the computer that was made by Richard Pryor grabs this lady and then turns her into a robot zombie. It's very scary. I have a lot of trauma from it from when I was growing up.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. There's your token 1980s reference here. But we were able to raise $4,200 for LA wildfire relief. Thank you so much for everybody for their generous support. We also did a live reacts to the Xbox stream, the Xbox Developer Direct. We had a really good turnout for that one. We're going to keep doing that whenever we have a direct, a Nintendo Direct, a State of Play, whatever. We'll be there. So please like and subscribe to the Axe of the Blood God Twitch channel, twitch.tv/bloodgodpod. Final item. We're kicking off a week of side quest and Pantheon voting this week, starting on Monday through Wednesday. We're going to be voting on the next side quest. We've got 4 great topics on the docket, including the return of the possibility of a Nausica Valley of the Winds watch.
Let's go.
March Madness 2000s bracket. What is the best RPG of the past 25 years? Because the next side quest will be in March. The great PS2 RPG draft, in which we all try and create the ultimate PS2 RPG library. And in honor of the great David Lynch, rewatching Twin Peaks together and talking about it and talking about its impact on RPGs. All of these are going to be options. We'll be able to vote for them starting on Monday. If you're a subscriber to Axe of the Blood God over on Patreon, we're also going to be doing a Pantheon vote. And we're going to be focusing on the RPGs that are now eligible in 2025, including, and I know which one's going to win, so, but
let's go.
Cyberpunk 2077, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Genshin Impact, and such. I don't remember the other game that came out in 2020.
Did it start with a little
O?
Was it that one?
What? I don't know.
Okay. We'll
find
talk
out
about
what
it
the
later.
mystery game
Find out
is
what it
on
was later.
Wednesday.
Yeah.
I think I know what it is, but I don't know if I'm supposed to say or not.
I don't know.
I was
We'll
asking if it
find
was
out soon.
Omori.
I was gonna say
Oh,
Omori.
right, Omori. Okay.
Oh,
Maybe.
Omori.
Maybe. Who could say?
Right.
Sure, why not break my heart again?
Clearly, this is a strong contender, though.
Hey,
I
hey,
love Omori.
I like Omori.
I liked Omori a lot.
Whichever RPG we pick, we'll be doing a monthly game club for the next couple of months. We're just wrapping up Radiant Historia right now, and we'll be doing our Pantheon for that the first week of February. So tons and tons of great content if you're a subscriber at Axe of the Blood God, Twitch at patreon.com/bloodgodpod. Okay, let's get to the main topic. Are we in a turn-based RPG renaissance? I asked this question because just over the past week, we did an Xbox Developer Direct in which we saw a handful of games, most of which were action-focused and not that relevant to RPG fans, with an exception. That game was Expedition 33, which we had noticed last summer when it was first revealed, I think during Keeley Fest, and we were all going, wow, this looks really cool. Look at this game that looks kind of like Persona, but it has amazing Unreal Engine 5 graphics. It's developed by I believe a French studio, and it has big mid-2000s Xbox 360 vibes, but we were comparing it to, I think, Lost Odyssey, among others. Other people were comparing the speed and the verb and the vibe of the battle system with Persona. So we all kind of walked away going, wow, Expedition 33 looks legit. It's yet another example of a turn-based RPG that looks pretty cool. Folks, I would never have believed that we could be in this place given how publishers have talked about turn-based RPGs. It's this thing that's just not mainstream. Not something that the general audiences are going to want to buy, but more and more turn-based is the way. What's going on? I want your thoughts, Nadia?
I think people are going to latch onto good games, whatever the system is, as long as the pacing is good. I think Persona 5 is one that really kind of turned people onto turn-based RPGs when they weren't really into them before. And you have the style, the graphics there, of course, it's a huge draw, the music as well. But also, Persona and Metaphor especially are very snappy battle systems. Like, they're fast, yes, but they're also satisfying to use. Like, every flourish, you just never get sick of seeing it every single time. Whereas, I don't know, for some reason, you know, I'm not saying, of course, Dragon Quest XI was like a failure by any means. Like, it did very well, but didn't, of course, get that Persona energy behind it. Maybe the pacing's not quite the same. Maybe the graphics are a little too traditional. But I think Atlas is really in charge of doing this whole, like, hey, everyone, look, turn-based is cool after all. Renaissance. Yeah, I should have swallowed before I said that. Yeah, so I think they are to thank for a lot of it. And also, Expedition 33, I feel like, yes, it is a French studio. They actually, I forget the name of the era they're taking from, but it's before the First World War, the Golden Era. I forget the name of it.
The Golden
That's the
Era?
art style. Well,
like the Gilded Age?
Golden Era. Not really. There was a term for it in French.
Someone's saying is Belle Epoque.
Belle Epoque. There you go.
That sounds right, because it sounds very French, and so I will go with that.
Yeah, there you go.
You can easily convince me by saying French words.
So even though it's using that French style, that French visual style, at the same time, you can tell they pulled Persona's energy into their battle system. And I think, again, energetic battle systems are the key to all this, like Super Mario RPG. It's a battle system, but it's a turn-based battle system, but a lot of people who weren't into turn-based battle systems at the time still latched on because the action commands were so much fun. Belle Epoque.
Oh yeah, no, that seems right. Meaning beautiful age refers to a period in European history from the end of the Franco-Prussian War in 1871 to the start of World War I.
There you go.
I.e., the period of time in which all of the European powers became incredibly rich because they were plundering the rest of the world through colonialism.
And then they threw
The
it
Europeans
all
are
away.
like, what a great time. It was so amazing.
What a beautiful
Everybody
time
was
for
so
us.
happy.
Everybody's just having a great time right now.
Yeah.
Everything's great from my perspective.
Everybody is having an incredible time. Everybody. Especially us.
I think it's interesting to draw the comparisons between Clair Obscur, which is like, I think a game that I'm not going to say came out of nowhere, but it definitely did surprise a lot of people. Like the SGF reveal was one thing, but I think this last developer direct was when people were like, oh, they're not just kind of doing an RPG in a way that like, oh, you know, we're doing an RPG. Like there's a real love for the style of RPG. It was when they made the big effort to say like, we've got an overworld in the developer direct, where I was like, oh, they like get it.
They know
like,
who they're playing to.
They actually get it. And it is impressive the way in which it looks like an RPG, and like a classical RPG, and again, like a turn-based RPG. It even has turn-based ideas from things that aren't even, you know, Final Fantasy or whatever, but it has like very like Mario and Luigi and Super Mario ideas with like the timing attacks and things like that. So I do find that really interesting, but I think Nadia is dead on, and you are too, Kat, about like the fact that like Persona. Sorry, my cat is kicking the keyboard. So
hey, it's Poe, our fourth host.
Poe, who does not want to like be normal. Persona really was the like moment when I think turn-based definitely got like a push forward, and it was like this big RPG that everybody was talking about that was turn-based. But I think the other part of that pie is Baldur's Gate 3. And weirdly enough, Baldur's Gate 3 is like a callback to the roots of RPGs, because you think about how they started, you go all the way back to tabletop role-playing, and things kind of evolved into action from there, and now like constricted back to turn-based. It feels like we kind of ebb and flow in that way, because we have major series like Final Fantasy that move into, I mean, they were already moving into action with ATB, but are now kind of in the action RPG area. But then you have other series, Persona, Metaphor, that like stick to the guns of turn-based.
Yeah.
So I'm curious why y'all think that is. Like, is there a reason that works? Is Baldur's Gate 3 turn-based just because D&D is turn-based? Is this all just because we got into actual plays over the pandemic? Like,
I have a theory. I actually think actual plays are part of it. It helped cue kind of a big D&D renaissance, but even before that, over the past, I won't say 20 years, there's been a little bit of a board game renaissance among a lot of different people. There are plenty of people who don't really like video games, but do love board games, and board games are inherently turn-based. Can't really make an action-oriented board game, I don't think. Also, card-based games like Magic the Gathering are extremely popular, and those are inherently turn-based as well. Yu-Gi-Oh! So people have been indoctrinated to turn-based games over the years, to where doing a command-based system doesn't feel as weird. And as long as they have especially really good production values, a game like, for example, Metaphor Refantasio, or Baldur's Gate 3, people are, I think, sort of willing to roll with a command-based system. I mean, there were plenty of people complained about the ins and outs of Baldur's Gate 3's system, and maybe it could have been even bigger if it was an action game like Witcher 3 or something like that. But in its own way, it also helped it stand out. It wasn't just another open world action game. It had it put a lot of the focus on the individual role playing, which came out in the combat, and so it was not a detriment to the game ultimately, and it made it feel very faithful to tabletop role playing.
I think that maybe the pandemic helped people slow down for a moment and appreciate a game like Baldur's Gate 3.
I think the pandemic turned people feral is what I think happened, honestly. I don't think people slowed down.
God. So are you saying that they endured turn-based RPG gameplay because they really wanted to tap Asterians behind?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, that's fair.
I think there's something to the idea, too, of like how much you have to select from, like how much there is. Like I think, to your point, there are a lot of action RPGs nowadays. I think there's definitely a lot of games that are straight up action RPGs, your Ys, your Scarlet Nexus and Tales games and stuff like that. Or there's a lot of games that are like action games that started adding in RPG elements. We did an episode about this not too long ago where we were talking about how everything's an RPG now. So like God of War is an RPG now. Horizon is an RPG now. Last of Us arguably has a lot of RPG elements in its guns. You level that party up, and your party is your guns. So like the idea that as other games start to add those elements in, they start to mirror the ideas of action RPGs. And so now things that are a little bit more action RPG, your Final Fantasy 16s and stuff like that, are now overlapping with Assassin's Creed, and there's just a glut of things available. Meanwhile, like turn-based is still, I would argue, not the most popular format out there for an RPG, and so there's less to choose from, but that does make a standout title stand out even more in that moment.
I think it's a hard sell to executives if you're trying to fund your game. One of the reasons that Larian was able to even put out Baldur's Gate 3 is because in the format that it ended up being was because it was an independent studio and it knew what it wanted to make, and it dang well made a classical CRPG with incredible production values, and it went over like gangbusters. Interestingly enough, if you think back to the reception of Baldur's Gate 3, I don't think many people were actually praising the battle system that much. Even hardcore RPG fans complained about barrelmancy and the ability to just stack up barrels and blow up bosses and how it trivialized things.
Yeah,
how getting to level 12.
That's the fun of it. That's the whole point of it.
Yeah, no, it's a delight. I love it.
It was a Divinity.
The whole point of a campaign is to be that obnoxious dick who's like, I'm gonna like seduce the boss and like blow him up, crawl up his butt, and carve him from the inside out, which has actually happened with the halfling. There's a whole green text 4chan thing about that. It's really incredible. But yeah, you got to have that one player. You got to have that possibility. Otherwise, you're a really dull DM.
Well, it's not even that. It's that when you have like a video game and you allow the player to have the freedoms, but also like the infinite patience of a computerized GM or something like that, who's not going to just be like, well, you're taking too long on this encounter, or you're like not moving forward, or you're doing a bunch of stupid stuff, so I'm going to throw a wrench into the mix. Like, that is the benefit of a human GM.
My husband made a DM quit once because he's like, okay, so who's your character? He's a dragon slayer. What does he do? I slay dragons. Like, that's it. I'm out of here. It's just
get out.
Apparently that's what it's like to play with my husband.
I do think there's something to the idea that like giving the player that much freedom is good for what Baldur's Gate 3 ultimately did, but it is also why that game feels markedly different from playing like a tabletop like D&D session. It is a different experience altogether. Even when we're playing co-op Baldur's Gate 3, I would say that's a pretty different experience from when we sat down and did D&D as a group, right?
Oh, for sure.
Very much so. Because I think that they had to visualize a lot of how these different skills would work in the game. And there were abilities like the bard abilities. There's one that in the board game is very effective for tying down enemies. And I think it's a laughing, like basically the enemy starts laughing. And in the D&D board game, it's actually very good. But in Baldur's Gate 3, the game, it's not a great skill. I would say that actually the skills that are the best are generally very offensive oriented.
Yeah.
Very AoE oriented. And I think that's because you end up in very large scale encounters a lot of the time, as opposed to, at least in my experience, a lot of DMs have smaller, more intimate encounters, but maybe with bigger foes. And so you start getting really creative with your actual skills, and the DM can go, I'll allow it. That's really funny. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, and by the way, you get a point of inspiration. That's fun. I like that one. So
Roll for initiative.
Roll for initiative. I have a theory, and that theory is that CRPGs are a nostalgic genre. Or there's a strong nostalgia element to turn-based RPGs in general. CRPGs and JRPGs. I think it's not for nothing that Expedition 33 explicitly emphasized a world map in a, are you nostalgic for this genre? Do you really love old school JRPGs, guess what? We got a world map, and the turn-based aspects play into that.
Not just the world map, but we immediately identify the freaky little dude, the freaky little guy. The
Yes.
guy who looks like the big turkey from the Totoro fantasy in Bob's Burgers.
I love him. He's so good.
We love
he's,
weird little guys.
he's like a big we're talking about the big inflatable guy, right? Like
Yeah,
the one
yeah.
that you like ride like an airship. Your airship
And
is
he
just a
swims.
freaky dude. Like I love that. Like they're cooking. They're on something else over there. Like in so many ways. I was thinking about this recently because we talked about I think it was on the charity stream during the 16 segment that like Final Fantasy is kind of inherently goofy in a lot of fun ways, and like some of the better Final Fantasies really do embrace that. And there was something in that Claire, oh my god, I can't ever remember the full name because it's so Claire Obscure, Expedition 33.
Expedition 33.
Yeah. Claire de
They need a
Lune.
subtitle too.
Yeah. That is Expedition 33 is the subtitle. They need another
Well,
subtitle.
they need
Subtitle.
another.
Yeah.
Another subtitle. Just keep going. How many
The
layers down
Reckoning.
can you go?
Yeah.
No, the beginning. Origins.
Origins. That's a good one. Zero.
Add an origins or an awakening.
Sparking Zero on the end. Yeah, so for Claire Obscure Sparking Zero, I do think it's, when I was first seeing it, I was worried that it was going to be very grimdark and very like moody, and I think that can work, but it also results in things that usually aren't super memorable for me. Like I was immediately starting to think of stuff like Greedfall, where I was like, yeah, that was a video game I played once upon a time. Sure. Yeah, that absolutely exists. But like when they started showing the goofy guys, like you have a blue mage who literally goes like digging through remains and like, I found a leg, I can turn into it now, and he like turns into it, and I'm like, oh, this is so good, this is what I want. But to the turn-based aspect, and specifically why I think they might be doing it, I do think there is a nostalgia play, and you know, I think there is a level of, these are the games we grew up playing, these are the games we fondly remember, we want to see that reflected in the modern landscape. I do think it's interesting that so many developers are starting to go back that way. I'm curious as to why we think that is. Like, is there, outside of like nostalgia play and appeals for like sentimentality, is there like a gameplay reason? Like, do we think there's fundamentally something more interesting about turn-based gameplay versus action gameplay?
I don't think that developers are going back to, mainstream developers are necessarily going back to turn-based in numbers. We're mostly we're kind of cherry picking in a way. Yes, we have some really notable examples, but I think the vast majority of games are very action focused in general. It's just that we've seen an uptick in very successful turn-based games in recent years. I think, so I have a couple theories as to why a turn-based game can be very successful in this era. One is, I think turn-based games really kind of benefit from this era of wikification, where so many websites are game help oriented, are SEO oriented. And so people are putting together these really intricate builds that is much easier to carry off in a turn-based game than in an action game. I'm not saying that you can't do that. Monster Hunter is a great example of a very dense, very deep build-oriented game.
Yeah.
But turn-based RPGs just naturally lend themselves to that because you can't get all of the kinetic energy from the action. You need to have a tactical element, and having a strategic build system really plays into that. So as a result, it becomes a lot stickier. You have people searching for builds and whatnot online. That encourages websites to cover it more because they want to build guides for it.
We know a thing or two.
People are making videos around it. I found the most broken build, LOL.
Found
and then
the
you got a whole video
build. Yeah.
Yeah, someone actually in the chat mentioned Octopath Traveler 2, which was a game all about building those characters, or was that just the first one, or the second one had a lot of character
Second
building?
one had a lot. I would say it like became more about character building when you got to the end game, and you had like the additional, because everybody could subclass basically.
Yeah, that's right.
And so they had their main class, but then everybody could also switch to a different class and eventually adopt the mechanics of that class and learn some of the like passive stuff, the big moves of that class. And so there was a lot of like, how am I going to multi-class these characters to all have the things that I need, but also things that would benefit what they do. And then you had like the extra 4 secret classes that could then do additional stuff, and that's where you start to really break the game open. IMO, where you had like Partitio using one of those things that would let him put single target buffs across the entire party inside. And
that's when the game was over.
That is a turn-based RPG to me. Is you do have that moment of you're not trying to do a combo or like link together certain moves or even do these like tag attacks. I think it's more about like literally slowing down and being like, okay, when you have the time, how do you want to like strategize this out? Yes. I do think a really interesting place to see that difference is the difference between Zenless Zone Zero and Honkai Star Rail, 2 games made by Hoyoverse, produced by Hoyoverse, and kind of in the same like
written monetization.
By Hoyoverse. Yeah, like literally like they are kind of the same game, just with different combat systems and obviously like aesthetics and things like that. But I point that out because they are both free to play gacha games that like revolve around the idea that you're going to get these characters and gear them up with the gacha rolls that you are using. But then when you actually play the combat, one is an action RPG where you're kind of doing these tag-ins, tag-outs that almost feel like a Devil May Cry adjacent type game, which is kind of where we've seen some of those action games go. We've seen even Tales of Arise is getting to the point where it's starting to feel very like Marvel-y, DMC, very involved. Platinum Games have been going that way for a long time, and obviously Final Fantasy 16. But then you have Honkai Star Rail, which is a very like flattened out but like intricate turn-based RPG where you are building this machine of a team, and the whole idea is getting these characters that kind of synergize and work with each other. Granted, it can be used to not great ends, like, oh man, this new anime lady's out and she's gonna really make your team work well. Like you thought you had a good DPS before, this new anime lady that you could roll for is a great DPS, and
everybody needs it for the meta.
I experienced that recently because I tried to go back into Honkai Star Rail like not too long ago because I was like, oh, I've heard the story's like really good and I would like to see more of it. And immediately I was greeted with all these different currencies and ways in which I could be like plugging things in to get things, and like you got to do this to do that to do this to do that, and I was like, I just want to play an RPG, and I just booted up Final Fantasy 12 instead.
Which is probably the better option.
I was just gonna say, I think that like it's interesting to think about that distinction, but also to think about like what that sort of those trappings can entail and what it means for when you play those games, you know? Because I mean, in the case of Honkai Star Rail, it has been turned into a means of like, this fuels the machine, right? Like this makes the machine hum. I'm sure if we end up doing the Genshin Impact Pantheon, we'll talk more about that. But like, I think for turn-based RPGs in general, it does shift the way you think about how that stuff operates. And to your point earlier, Kat, I think a lot of the big games that we know about coming up for 2025 are turn-based RPGs. Monster Hunter aside, like we do have Pokemon Legends ZA, we have Clair
That's not
Obscure.
turn-based. Okay, yeah, it is. Never mind.
If it's a Pokemon game, unless they do something radically different, it is a turn-based
game we haven't
RPG.
talked about, by the way.
We should talk about Pokemon. Yeah.
Something else to mention is that social media really kind of took off around the time that RPGs started their renaissance. And I've said in the past about how Persona 5, I think part of the reason it was so successful is because it had those memes and whatnot on Twitter back when Twitter wasn't a complete hellhole. And I just feel like people seeing other people play snippets of games, whether through social media, whether through Instagram, TikTok, whatever the kids are into these days, that can kind of get people curious and realize like, oh, maybe I should give this turn-based RPG thing a try.
So,
you know,
we were talking about gacha games earlier. One of the aspects of turn-based RPGs, like Honkai Star Rail, there was another one that I played. You can automate them.
Yes.
You can literally press a button and say auto battle, and your character will run and fight and automatically complete stuff and gather items. So I've had times where my phone is literally just sitting there playing a gacha game by itself, completing battles, which works a lot better with turn-based than it does with action.
Which is like the nefarious side of all that, because it's a lot easier to then like create a system in which you encourage like, oh, you want the best builds for this. You want the best characters you can have for this. Your machine is operating at 87% efficiency, but what if it operated at 90?
Thanks, Avast.
What's that worth to you?
Optimization.
I do.
Yeah, I've noticed the same thing with the Pokemon card game online. It has the auto battle thing. Like, why play?
Does it?
We just want. Yeah, there's an
That
auto battle.
explains some of the people
that's
I
so
played on
funny.
there. Yeah.
I had no idea.
I do think like Pokemon is a really interesting one, because literally last night I had a really long conversation with some friends of the show, including one Jesse Vitelli and John Carson, where we were talking about Pokemon and like where, because it was all in the context of like Switch 2 and like what does Pokemon look like on the Switch 2, but we just talked for a long time about like what does Pokemon need to do something different, and does Pokemon need to do something different? We talked about the idea of removing gym battles as like a fundamental concept, because it already feels like they're kind of leaning that way to begin with. And we talked about the idea
That's
of,
what I like. I like the gym battles.
Well, but
more gym battles, not less.
Imagine that the gym leaders are now just characters that you do eventually have to beat, that you do eventually have to overcome, but they're not like these static characters inside a town that you like go town to town to town. It's like, okay, I went through Route 33 and now I'm going to go fight gym number 4. And instead they're like characters involved in the story that are moving around and doing stuff within the world. I personally think that's kind of novel and interesting.
I mean, they kind of do that. They involve gym leaders in the story. I mean, even in Pokemon Crystal.
But you like, you walk into them. You walk into their town. You walk into their house.
You're saying make it less linear. Make it more dynamic.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
But
I mean, they tried to do that with Scarby, where it said, okay, here are 3 different aspects of Pokemon. Catch the Pokemon, catch the legendary Pokemon, fight in the gyms. Go do it. Go do whatever.
Yeah, I like that system. It's just too bad the game ran like crap.
Well, my problem with Pokemon, and we're getting back to this again, is that they leaned into raids. A system that I don't think works well within the context of Pokemon. And they really have done an extremely poor job of playing up solo content, which is what I want. And this is specifically me. Like, I'm sure that they could say that their internal telemetry says that not enough people play, say, the Battle Frontier to warrant having it. But I feel more and more that I just want to bounce off Pokemon because this solo content is very wanting, and I don't want to do raids. Raids are actually really poorly implemented and not very fun to do, and I don't see it as really viable in-game content.
I didn't play much Scarvi, but I thought the solo content was okay in that.
I think it's pretty good in Scarvi.
It was once the DLC came out, right?
No, I genuinely think that like the story stuff that you do in Scarvi is good. Like
it's the story is trivial. It's easy to get.
Yes, it's trivial. Like yes,
the actual gameplay around the story in Pokemon is always trivial because it's based around literally having a 5-year-old be able to beat it.
That's an important fork to like point out. Is like are we talking about like, is it a challenging
end game? I'm talking end game solo content.
Yeah. Okay, so the reason I stress that is like, again, are we talking about like, is the gameplay like stimulating and challenging, or is like the story and actual like content of what is happening in the game interesting? Because I think this branch, the story and stuff is pretty good in Scarvi. Even like great once you get to like the final part of that game. I think the finale of that game is extremely good and maybe one of the best things the Pokemon Company has created in one of these games in years. But like, I think is it going to be a stimulating and challenging thing? No, I understand that like maybe I think Indigo Disc does have like some challenges and some actual like you have to gym battle and like fight against trainers that kind of know what they're doing and don't just have a team that was thrown together by like a random name generator. But like otherwise, you can kind of get through that game by just type matching, right? That's all you really need to do at the end of the day is like, oh, I'm going to go fight the electric gym. Oh, I better bring stuff that beats electric. And that's it. And I don't know that Pokemon changes that for the mainline series, but I do think that places like Arceus, I thought Arceus was a really smart game because it gave them the room to say, okay, this is a solely single player adventure. It's not multiplayer, so we don't got to worry about PvP balance. It is solely single player, and we're just going to have you build your party, build your team, go out, catch, fight, and focus it on that stuff. And I think that made Arceus really memorable because of that. And I'm hopeful for Za because, like, I think I think now it's like, okay, we know that Legends can be something that is different and does not necessarily have to be like the flavor of Pokemon that people expect, because I do think there is something that you expect when you get a Pokemon game. I think if you got a Pokemon game and it was like tough from the get-go, you'd have a lot of parents who are like, my kid can't beat Pokemon and stuff like
My
that.
kid's too stupid
No,
to beat Pokemon.
I understand
Let's live
that.
in the woods now.
And I don't
I'm
even
not
think kids are
saying-
bad at Pokemon, but I do think like those games have to be approachable in some manner.
I don't mind playing through the extended tutorial that is the story. Actually, people like to rag on Pokemon Sun and Moon. I actually think Pokemon Sun and Moon had, as far as I'm concerned, it had some pacing issues, especially with the opening tutorialization areas, but the story itself was one of the best I've played in a Pokemon game.
Oh,
Full
yeah,
stop.
I
That's
love
Team
Sun
Skull,
and Moon.
the best
They were
team.
great.
I love them. Yeah, they're amazing. But what I'm
Had the
saying is, I
Meth Lab,
have
town.
I have played great Pokemon endgame content. The Battle Frontier, the Pokemon World Tournament from Black 2 and White 2, amazing stuff. And I'm just saying that's what I want back. Also, even in Sword and Shield, they had the Isle of Armor, I think, content where you're raising up a Pokemon through various challenges. That was fantastic. That was a fantastic example of endgame solo content. So
I think you would like the
Hopefully we get
Indigo
more.
disc then, because I think the Indigo disc is what you were kind of looking for out of Pokemon Scarvi. But
well, yeah. I will play the Indigo disc and Scarvi when it is in a manageable frame rate that's not like sub 20 when I'm in the overworld.
that's the other part of it. Yeah.
I literally
Unfucked
cannot
editions,
deal
let's
with it.
go. Switch to.
Okay, we got to move on in a second, but the last point I want to hit is tactics RPGs, and it was really funny because left unsaid a little bit is 10 years ago we did an episode on Axe of the Blood God. Go check it out. Turn-based RPGs in modern games. And I think at the time I was reacting to the fact that Final Fantasy VII Remake was going to be an action-based system, and I was pretty grumpy about it. And
I never would
now
have
I'm like, oh, I actually love Final Fantasy VII Remake/Rebirth battle system. I think it's the best of both worlds
good.
of command-based
Yeah.
won the
and
war against
action-based.
yourself. Yeah.
You love Big Brother and action games.
I think it's an exquisite battle system, actually. I think it's really, really,
agree.
really fun.
I think it did hit the best of both worlds, as you say, especially Rebirth. Like Remake, I liked, but they did some refinements in Rebirth that make it a lot of fun to bounce between characters. Like, and it is action based, it's action based and turn based. And I love the fact that when you stop the action to make those choices in the menu, it stops certainly enough for you to make those choices, but also it kind of has that like dramatic echo that you can hear from the voices, like it's of your comrades as you're fighting and you're making these decisions. Like, just a really, really neat effect. Some really good sound design on that game.
Agreed. The ironic thing is Square has been sort of adamant that turn-based RPGs don't really work. It's all about action. That's the mainstream thing. But then they turned around and did a whole blunderbuss full of tactics RPGs,
Yeah,
like Triangle Strategy and whatnot.
I love Triangle Strategy.
Pretty stellar, great
It's a good
game.
Yeah.
Blunderbuss 2028.
I
Gotta vote
don't
in.
think the
They
Blunderbuss
also
had that
released
many.
Octopath Traveler.
I don't think it had that many
which-
tactics games in it though. It was just Triangle Strategy. Diofield was like a real-time.
They also
strategy
did a
game.
remake of Tactics Ogre.
Yeah,
And there are remakes of Front Mission and 1 and 2.
those
and-
were through Gung Ho and stuff like that.
Oh,
That's
Gung Ho do
different.
it? Were they okay? Was it
The
were
From
they
Mission
good?
stuff, I
Bad?
never checked them out. So
Because Gung
there's
Ho,
a
I like
rumor.
Puzzles and Dragons.
There's still a rumor out there of a Final Fantasy Tactics remake. We'll see if we ever get that.
yeah, maybe
Oh,
one day.
yeah,
Oh,
okay.
excuse me, it was not Gung Ho. It was Forever Entertainment. Apologies.
Yeah. Well, they outsourced it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Outsourced.
But I think with like tactics, even some of the like the smaller games I'm looking forward to this year are like Demon School, which is a tactical RPG that
Oh, right,
has a lot
yeah,
of
that looks cute.
influence from like less thought of tactics games, things like Valkyria Chronicles, Jeanne d'Arc, things like that. And like it was really weird seeing Jeanne d'Arc get ported to the PS4 and PS5. I think that was last year. That was crazy.
Oh, right.
Cannot believe
Yeah.
it got like, and it was ported in the way that they just made like the version that was on PSN and stuff like that playable on a PS4, PS5. But still, even like that effort for Jeanne d'Arc is crazy. But I do think like a lot of tactics games are kind of pushing this forward. And we talk about tactics games coming. I mean, it's probably about time for a new Fire Emblem at some point. And
Yeah.
a Fire
It's
Emblem
always
in the
time for
first
a new
year of the
Fire
Switch
Emblem.
too. Yeah.
heard.
Yeah.
Engage was so good.
I
Sorry.
love Engage.
I love Engage so much. I want to play it again, actually. I'm
yeah, me
feeling
too.
the itch. Yeah.
Too.
Unicorn
I want a
Overlord
new
wasn't
one.
strictly turn-based, but because it was more of a set and forget. How would you describe it? A gambit-based game?
Yeah.
But-
I was thinking about this.
Scratch the same itch. Scratch the same itch.
I was talking with some of the Blood God folks in the Discord last night about this because I was playing Final Fantasy 12 while everybody was hanging out in the Discord. And I realized that I think part of the reason why 12 just scratches my brain is because it's an auto battler. Like I play a lot of like Super Auto Pets, Dota Auto Chess, The Bazaar is like the new one I've been playing. And it's the same mechanical apparatus as like Final Fantasy 12's Gambits or Unicorn Overlord's Tactics, where it's like, oh, you set this thing, you create the machine in a nefarious way, and then you push the battle bot out into the arena and you say, go battle bot, and then it fights the other battle bot and you're like, no, battle bot, why did you just shoot? I said when below 20% HP heal. And you take battle bot back and you reorder the gambits. You're like, okay, go battle bot, and like there's something really good about
Oh
that.
my god, dude. I was up until 2 a.m. at times with just messing around with the order of the commands and mixing and
Meanwhile, I
matching
just
different
did not-
characters.
I can't get into that gameplay. Like even the Gambit system. That's what it's called in Final Fantasy 12, right?
Yes.
Is
yeah.
it because you feel kind of too removed from it, or
I
because
feel way too
they're
removed from it, and I don't like failing and like retooling and failing. I don't like failing a whole bunch of times over to get
I
the
do
right
like in
answer.
12 that you can actively, like when you're in the middle of the battle, you can start changing your gambits and stuff like that.
Yeah, like that's why I like
that's
the
been
system.
really good. Also, 12 has just, not that we need to turn this into the Final Fantasy 12 hour, but it has a lot of just goofy stuff that you can add on to it. Like it has crazy doohickeys that you can do where like there's green magic and there's a lot more status effects than I'm used to using at like this stage of a Final Fantasy game. But also I got this ability called Shades of Black that lets you just cast any random black magic spell. You just like, it's a technique that's like cast any spell. It's like wild magic from D&D. And so it's the idea that like, oh, I could cast fire or I could cast Ultima. It's like
There's a character like that in Final Fantasy IV, Tella the Sage, who his
I
whole
love
thing
it.
is like he's a doddering old man who is, as he actually gets older, he loses HP like as he levels up, which is pretty funny. But one of
that
the things he can
rules.
do is like kind of amnesiac, and he has a spell called Recall, I think it is, and you can get any, I don't know if it's any black spell or any spell period, but you get fire, you get Meteo. You know, you just don't know what you're gonna get.
to me,
I was just going to say, I think that does start to resemble a turn-based thing because, I mean, Unicorn Overlord is essentially a turn-based RPG once you get into the fights. Like, everybody has their speed ratings and stuff like that, and they all take their turns
and you're
fight
pausing
lead.
and
Yeah.
you're directing your characters around the screen and everything. There's a pause element. Yeah. I was going to say that, to me, the mark of a good and successful turn-based system is when there's a lot of support spells at work. If you're just using offensive spell or offensive attack that builds into a limit break, it gets repetitive really fast. The meat in it is when you're buffing your characters, debuffing enemies, putting status effects on them, finding interesting ways to game the actual rules and mechanics. And Baldur's Gate 3 did an okay job of that, I think, at points, especially once you got into later portions of the game, but almost all of it was based around how can I give my character a lot of turns or a lot of attacks at once. Honestly, one of the reasons I think Dragon Quest remains timeless and is just so fun to play to this day is it nailed the balance of buffs and debuffs and building up your party and individualized abilities for your characters really early on. And it just was like, okay, we found it. We found the recipe for a great Dragon Quest battle system. We're just going to keep doing that until for the next 30 years.
Well, they always add to it, and it's always great. But what they do it really well.
I agree. So, dear friends, what do you think? Why are we in a turn-based RPG renaissance? Do you think we're in a turn-based RPG renaissance? Share your thoughts on social media. We're on Blue Sky at BlugUpPod, or send me an email at cat@BlugUpPod.com. Share your thoughts or the RPGs we missed. We want to hear from you. Okay. That's it for our conversation about turn-based RPG renaissance. Now it's time for a series of random encounters. Genshin Impact makers are paying $20 million in an FTC case over violating children's privacy. Speaking of Hoyoverse, Cognisphere, the game's distributor, has called the allegations inaccurate, but has promised to make changes. Palworld, remember Palworld? That's the game that's getting sued by the Pokemon makers, is adding an ending scenario this year. An unannounced Warhammer RPG was apparently canceled toward the end of last year. Capcom has provided updates on Monster Hunter Wild's performance improvements, saying it's aiming for lower PC GPU requirements, which is great because I'm planning on playing on PC. Metaphor Refantagio is getting an official manga adaptation. And folks, this is just the beginning. We'll be getting a Metaphor Refantagio anime, concert series, everything soon enough. They're going to do the full persona on it.
2.5D stage play, yeah.
Sega has launched a new Sega account for linking its games and services, which may be connected to whatever its really big game is coming. Pokemon TCG Pocket's next expansion is the Space-Time Smackdown and will focus on Dialga and Palkia and the Sinnoh starters, so my homie Infernape will be getting some love. I'm very excited about that.
It's the funniest possible name they could have picked for that.
That's pretty good. I like that.
Earthblade, sadly, that's the game from the creators of Celeste, has been canceled. Very sad.
Really?
About that one, yeah.
That's too bad.
R.I.P.
Did they say why?
They had a bit of a falling out with one of the key designers who worked on the pixel art. There was a lot of arguments over the Celeste IP, and once it all got sorted out, they all just kind of agreed that it was best if they parted ways. And at that point, they were like, should we start over? Like, we've been having some trouble even making this game. It seemed like there was a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes that was kind of hurting Earthblades. So they said they're getting back to prototyping. They'll make a new game, but yeah, RIP. And finally, EA says that Dragon Age The Veilguard underperformed. It looks like it did just under 1.5 million in sales. They were using the term engagements, referring to the fact that I believe it was available via EA Play or something to that effect. Also, it has seemingly received its final major update. And finally, happy anniversary to Mass Effect 2. It released on January 26, 2010, and is now 15 years old. Wow.
Oh my
Originally
God.
came out on the Xbox 360 and the PC, and in so many ways, BioWare has been chasing that high ever since. Eric, this is your moment.
My moment is
Your moment.
It
Finally.
is it is 2020 and we're going, what is the future of BioWare? It is 2025 and we're going, what is the future of BioWare? It is 2030 and hopefully Mass
I'm
Effect
Dr.
is the
Manhattan
future.
sitting on a rock.
Yeah, I tire of these children. I tire. Yeah. So I think the interesting thing about all this, obviously, like Dragon Age not performing super well. I do think there's an aspect of it that I'm like, it was never going to live up to whatever expectations it could have been, because much like, say, Final Fantasy 15, it was a game that was in development for eons. It went through so many evolutions, through reported on reboots and scrappings and changes and stuff, that honestly, the fact that we got the game that came out in the end, which is like a fully functional, playable BioWare game that looks, feels, sounds like everything like a BioWare game and has some pretty interesting and compelling ideas in it, is like kind of a miracle in and of itself. And I think a lot of folks at BioWare should feel pretty proud of the fact that they even got a video game out at the end, like after years and years of that. I think the other thing though is like, there definitely has been a sentiment of, there are definitely like Veilguard aficionados, lovers out there, but I do think the broad sentiment across like good faith readings of the game, I stress that part very much.
Good faith, yes.
Good faith readings of the game, and myself included, is that it was not the greatest Dragon Age. It carried the torch forward, but it didn't necessarily like nail everything. And there were definitely parts of it that I think I personally was a little disappointed by, and came away from feeling pretty mixed on. And it's definitely made me want to go like, okay, like I would love to see what the next Dragon Age is like, and if they keep going down this path, or if they kind of change up, or if some of this is just left over from the years and years of development, and maybe they do kind of get back to a more tactical, more like keep some of the really cool build stuff that I liked in the Veilguard, but find ways to kind of reincorporate some of that more classic Dragon Age feel into it, and definitely some more choice, some more branching, some more companions that want to actually like fight with you a little bit. But now I think the question is like, what is Dragon Age's future? Because Dragon Age is this game that, Corinne Bush left the studio to go work on something else, is my understanding. And a lot of that team, I imagine a lot of focus at BioWare is now on Mass Effect, and whether Mass Effect turns out
which
the way
is still
they
in
want Mass Effect
pre-production, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you start to ask yourself, okay, like what is the move forward for BioWare as a company? And
I mean, if we get another Dragon Age, it'll be in like 10 years.
Yeah, and
Which-
even a new Mass Effect is probably years off. I'm expecting
It's a long
personally,
3-4 years away at least.
Yeah, I'm expecting 2028 probably, is if I had to just like guess off
So
the top
long.
of my head. Yeah, and that is a
My
very
friends,
long
I
time
will
from
be in
now.
my 50s by the time a new Dragon
Oh,
Age comes
God.
out.
Oh.
No, that means I'll be there too. Stop.
And it's
I think Dragon Age had a messaging problem right from the start. I mean, remember when the original trailer came out during Summer Game Fest and people were like, I don't know about
Yeah, it didn't look
this.
good.
And then they very quickly pivoted and were like, no, actually, it looks amazing. See? And people were like, but it's a linear action game. What's going on here? And so from the start, they were sort of battling against ideas that were being put into the people on the internet. And then they managed to build up some momentum, even despite the fact that it was, there was a concerted hate campaign against it. And I don't think, there's no sugarcoating that.
no.
And then when it finally came out, it unfortunately, I think the word of mouth was kind of poor. The core fans that it needed to capture were not extremely happy with the writing. And were not extremely happy with the way that the dialogue options were handled. There was a lot of ways of saying the same thing, but in different ways. It didn't feel like you were sort of meaningfully role-playing, which was a big part of Dragon Age, actually. And I'll be honest, it felt stilted at times.
I
think it was fun to play. I think it was a fun game to play. But among the core fans who, especially a lot of whom had came in with Inquisition, I think the word of mouth, it struggled with word of mouth. And when you don't have the core fans, you're going to have a hard time. You just are, even with good reviews.
As someone who is not really a Dragon Age head, how does Inquisition differ from the new one?
It differs massively.
Gameplay-wise?
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the biggest difference, for me personally, was that gameplay-wise, you only really control your character in Dragon Age the Veilguard, whereas in Dragon Age the Inquisition, in DAI, you had a full party that you were kind of commanding that was closer to Dragon Age Origins, which was closer to Baldur's Gate, which was like the idea that you have this entire crew that you're kind of skilling out, like giving different classes and abilities and kind of positioning, and it was like a pseudo tactical game where you even had a tactical pause where you kind of could move your characters around and stuff like that. Dragon Age the Veilguard was an action RPG. It was your character was the only
set pieces and everything.
Yeah, you're the only like fighter on the field, and your other party members will cast spells and can do combos with you, but they didn't even like have health bars and stuff like that. They were just kind of there to be an extra set of abilities that you were using. I think that was actually a pretty big shortcoming of the game for me, because even in Mass Effect, where like again your characters are pretty much just there to shoot at some smaller enemies and then use their abilities when they're there, at least like you can give them equipment, you can give them stuff to kind of enhance their stuff to make them shine a little bit more, and then like they are characters that can go down, they are characters that will help you in certain situations but can also like be in danger. And when you don't have that, you're not really playing a party game, you're kind of playing like a solo action RPG a la Final Fantasy 16 or something like that, right? And I do think that I really like the build stuff in Dragon Age the Veilguard. I think that was like a high point for me, was you got to make this character that was so powerful, it could do so much, and the things, every time you spent a skill point, you were kind of building up this idea of what your character was and what they could do. But one, like I'd never really felt pushed to really like you were enabling a power fantasy in the game where you didn't need the power, and you could kind of get through some of those fights by just playing an action game and not really like leaning into your build or leaning into your play style. And you could do some cool stuff and it looked really cool, but at the end of the day, like it was a little bit too easy in my on the normal difficulty, but also didn't really like when you're the only one who's really build crafting and growing and your characters aren't doing that doesn't help. But I think like there's a lot of other we could go for an entire podcast of talking. I mean, we did. I've done this multiple times over on this podcast on Normandy FM, and if you want like a positive opinion on Veilguard, you can go listen to Ken talk about it on our spoiler cast. I was the naysayer on that podcast, but we had some folks on there like Ken and Ash Parrish who did really enjoy the Veilguard, who would talk it up, talk about it a little bit. But I think ultimately like the broad sentiment about Veilguard is that it did miss. Like it did not hit like what it needed to hit for it to be like a smash success and return to form. It was a return to what a BioWare game was. I think that was the thing that a lot of people stress, was like BioWare made a BioWare game again. That's actually crazy, because it's been a long time between 2024
Gate 3 world.
Yeah, like you think about like Mass Effect Andromeda was probably the most recent one before that. And then even going back for Dragon Age, it was a decade removed. So like having a BioWare game again felt really good. But the problem now is like there's going to be another huge gap before the next BioWare game.
I think that Dragon Age the Veilguard has real strengths. I think it's very polished, really like attractive game in many respects. I think it has some cool decision points. I think characters like Lucanus and Emmerich are really fun. It has some great set pieces. I agree that it kind of missed, and it faced a lot of headwinds. Ultimately, both from in terms of the messaging, in terms of the hate campaign against it, and then in terms of struggling to kind of get the core the people who are going to be obsessed with Dragon Age on board. Having said that, my sister did platinum that game and beat it at least like 2 or 3 times and was completely obsessed with it. So one satisfied customer right there.
Yeah, and I think it's like it's important to stress like good faith criticisms and good faith readings of this, because at the end of the day, like that's what ultimately matters. I love talking about like the highs and lows of this game with people who actually give a shit and have actually played the video game. I don't give a shit about hearing from people who are just setting up their cottage to pay their rent this month. So
yeah. Well, they've moved on to Avowed and whatever.
I don't know. It's whatever video game is next. Look, there's always new video games, but rent is always due. So
this is true. Talking about Mass Effect 2 really quickly, I mean, it was an interesting turning point for BioWare because Mass Effect 1 was an action-based game, but it was still very rooted in a tactical element. Mass Effect 2 is when BioWare really went full action.
Yeah.
And it was extremely successful. And it's filed away a lot of the RPG elements and would do so even more in Mass Effect 3. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Shifting culture within the studio itself, a shifting, like maybe pressure from EA to do the most commercial thing. EA takes a real dim view of turn-based games in general. That they just don't think it's, what's the word, mainstream.
But they did so well with Sonic Chronicles. That was turn-based.
I'm glad we subjected ourselves to that, legitimately.
Days that Sonic Chronicles have been mentioned.
So Mass Effect 2, I remember when it came out, there was a lot of discourse, actually, around its move to a more action-based experience, to the point where, get ready to reset the counter, a lot of people were asking, was it an RPG at all? And that was when we started talking about what is an RPG. And I was like, well, you're role-playing, you're making interesting choices, you're getting to know your companions and building up your shepherd. I think it's an RPG, but it very deliberately got rid of the meat of the combat. So in so many ways, it was the diametric opposite of the turn-based RPG renaissance.
It was, I mean, there were a lot of games back then that were doing Gears of War, and they range from Mass Effect to Uncharted to everything else. Like, everybody was doing Gears of War because that was, like, sure, there have been other cover shooters, but, like, Gears of War was the one that made everybody go, like, oh, this is different. And I think you see a lot of that in Mass Effect 2, specifically. But, yeah, it's still an RPG in all, like, the meaningful senses of the word and term and, like, the space in which it plays. But it was, I think, maybe it's weird to think about that Mass Effect was maybe the precursor and the hovering reaper of so many things that would come to pass for AAA gaming at large, because Mass Effect 3, loot boxes, like the multiplayer had loot boxes, and that was one of the first major loot box games that came around. Mass Effect 2 was a AAA game that had action elements, but also incorporated a lot of RPG stuff and choice decision stuff that, like, Assassin's Creed would later on. And it's weird to think about that. Mass Effect is super well remembered, and I think, like, very much so. It's still, like, Mass Effect 2 is one of my favorite games of all time, but it was also, like, the harbinger, of all this stuff that would come to pass in the RPG and like AAA space.
It made fans out of everybody who hated RPGs.
Yeah.
All the people that I know who do not play RPGs, who like shooters and whatnot, were like, the series got really good with Mass Effect 2. And we're even talking that way with Mass Effect Legendary Edition, and I'm just like, qua? So
one is Legendary Edition forced me to like go back to 1 and really like interpret it on its own merits and think about it, because I loved 1 back when I played it, and then that same thing happened where I played 2 and played 3 and I was like, oh, 2 is so much better, and now I'm like, man, 1 had a lot going on. 1 had some stuff, and I still think 2 is overall like the tightest package and like the most solid like game out of the 3. But man, 1, there's just a vibe in 1 that like it's hard to find replicated in other video games even Mass Effect, that like
The original Mass Effect, go check out our Pantheon of the Blood God around it.
Yeah.
Even the original Mass Effect it's fun. I mean, it's like exciting. There's a lot of thrilling aspects to it. It gets off to a little bit of a slow start, but once you get out of the Citadel and you're properly exploring the universe, you're having a great time, honestly. And honestly, it's one of my favorite finales in the series. But actually, what happened to Mass Effect reminds me of what happened to Star Trek in the same way. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, was really successful, amazingly successful. And it was just the right package of philosophy, but action and cool ship-based sequences. It had a little bit of a naval Horatio Hornblower aspect to it. It had Khan. It had Kirk screaming, Khan! It was perfectly cheesy. It had a really moving ending that cashed in on, at that time, 20 years of nostalgia for Star Trek and love for Star Trek. And then Star Trek tried to do it multiple times after that. They tried to do it with Into Darkness. They tried to do it with Star Trek Nemesis. And each time it totally fell flat because it did not have any of the soul of Star Trek II. It did not have characters literally quoting Tale of Two Cities. It did not have reflections on aging. It did not have reflections on friendship. It did not have the emotional resonance of it. And I would say the same thing is with Mass Effect 2. That game was like perfect in many ways in terms of the cast, the balance of the side quests, the pacing, the connections to the original Mass Effect. And BioWare has kind of tried to replicate that. It hasn't really worked, unfortunately. And maybe they should just look deep in their soul. And
Kat, when you said Star Trek, when you're talking about Wrath of Khan, I just remembered how I saw a TikTok where it's just William Shatner saying, "But what does God need with a starship?" I haven't seen that movie. It looks
Star Trek
great.
5. That's Star Trek 5.
Was any good?
No, Star Trek 5 is infamously bad.
But that's the funniest thing to ask God.
Yeah,
Why
what does God need a starship?
Shut up. That's why. Anyway, sorry, Eric.
I'm playing B-roll of Mass Effect, the Legendary Edition, on the stream right now. And what if I just played Mass Effect? What would just when played Mass Effect a little bit?
Why not start another game?
What if we
Eric? Go
just
ahead.
treated ourselves a little bit?
Get that dopamine fix.
Well, when it comes out on Switch 2, go ahead and play it there.
Oh my god, I will legitimately.
Oh my god.
If Legendary Edition comes to the Switch 2, which I think it should, EA.
Yeah.
Look, y'all didn't buy into the Switch. I get it. We talked about that. Like, I covered so many financials where they were like, "Oh, well, we'll wait and see what happens
someday.
with that Switch."
See if it was a success.
Please, Legendary Edition Switch 2. God, I will play the entire trilogy again. I will go back through it, and I will play the exact same character and choices that I make every single time I play because I am a true BioWare fan. Like, oh man, yeah.
Pivoting to what we have been playing while we wait for the Switch 2 to happen, just a reminder that I will be wrapping up This Week in GeckoCon on January 31st, on the day of the final day of the game. So come check it out. It'll be a lot of fun.
Woo.
A final week, feeling a lot of emotions after a year of playing Persona 3 Reload. I'll give some of my thoughts on next week's episode once I finish it up. And I think I'm in the final dungeon of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as well. I fought a dragon.
You fought a
dragon.
Oh,
That was a
that
fun
thing.
fight.
That was a terrible fight. I hated that fight.
With the gravity? It was fun.
Yeah.
But-
Oh, you like that. I'm like, screw this.
Well, you have to block the fire with the pillars.
That one. God,
yeah.
I forgot about that one. Oh,
That was an interesting fight. You didn't like it, huh? It was just kind of annoying because you were getting burned up by the fire on the floor and everything.
Sure
It
was.
was a weird fight. I remember it feeling like not. It was really cool conceptually, but then like playing it, I was like, "What is happening? What am I doing?" Yeah, I
So
really
if I'm
want to see
able-
you stream that ending.
So if I'm able to get to the finale this week, I will definitely stream the end of that as well, as I promised during our charity stream. Eric, last week you wanted to talk about Dynasty Warriors, which is the diametric opposite
Let me tell
of
you about
turn-based games.
Let me tell you about why Dynasty Warriors is an action RPG now, even when it always was to begin with, but like the newest one is the most that they have ever done with this. Dynasty Warriors Origins just came out. I think is taking a lot of people by surprise. I've seen a lot more love and attention for this game than I usually see for a Dynasty Warriors game.
Great reviews too.
Yes. Yeah. And I reviewed it. Please go check out my review on But Why Though. I really like that game. I think I gave it like an 8.5 or something like that. And there even like 9s coming out for it and stuff like that, which like you never really see for a Dynasty Warriors game, even from the Dynasty Warriors sickos. So the thing I want to set up and why I think this is one, I genuinely think if you've ever been curious about a Dynasty Warriors game, and specifically Dynasty Warriors, maybe you've played a Muso before, maybe you've played like a Hyrule Warriors or a Three Hopes or a Strikers before, and you're curious about like the origin and where this all came from, I think this is the one you should try. And I know that might be heresy to some like longtime fans because there are some fundamental differences that have changed this game, but I think this is the one to do it. So like broad overview, Dynasty Warriors is about the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, a great historical novel from China. It's about the era of history that is fantasized and romanticized about like basically three factions that rise out of the rebellions that happened there, Wu, Shu, and Wei. And these heroes and great legends and names all come out of here. Some huge battles happen, and it's very... The way that we talk about, like, say, the 100-Year War and War of the Roses and stuff like that, it is that. It is that sort of, like, fodder for incredible drama and epic and things like that. And Dynasty Warriors Origins takes a different lean because I think for the longest time, Dynasty Warriors was built on this arcade idea of you pick a character, you play the level, you go through it. It's almost like beat 'em up adjacent where, like, I'm going to be Guan Yu and we're going to go to the Battle of, Hulao Gate and we're going to play through his version of that, and then you like pick a different character and play the same one. You kind of level them up individually and things like that. This one says you are a separate character, completely original character. Some people have taken to calling him like Johnny Muso and things like that. Zilawan is his actual name, the Wanderer. And you have your own story. Doesn't matter. I'm just going to tell you right now, it's not a great story. It's not like the most compelling part of this. The actual compelling part is the like drama and intrigue of the Three Kingdoms. But being this separate character who wanders around, who builds up their stats, who learns to fight with all these different weapons, who meets everybody, who social bonds with all of the officers and characters. Now it's basically like a Three Houses style take on this. And you get to basically choose which factions you fight with. Eventually you will get to a point where you have to choose which faction you align yourself with to like the chagrin of the other two. And
the chagrin.
Yeah. And I think that is the first smart thing they have done, because it means that like no longer are you going into arcade mode or story mode or whatever and being like, well, do you want to be Wu, Shu, or Wei? And you as a person who has never played Dynasty Warriors before has like no context for what any of that means. So you just kind of like pick a character and maybe you develop a favorite out of that, which is like, I think what happened for most people. That's why I'm a Wu fanboy, is because I started with characters like Zhou Yu and Sun Shangzong and like Sun Jian. Yeah. I started with those characters and I was like, oh, this is my team. When ultimately, like, they kind of each have a core concept. Wei is like total power, total authority. Shu is brotherhood and idealism and a little bit of socialism. And Wu is fast and furious. It's about family. It's Dom Toretto being like, it's about family. And I think that's the first thing that does really well. The second thing it does super well, and I'm going to cut the B-roll for this because it's something else. The battles in this game go hard. Like there are giant charges. There are huge moments of just like storming a castle. And I'm going to cut forward a little bit in this gameplay that I've pulled up. Just storming in with a force, and there are arrows raining down and catapults firing and all these officers like swinging through the fray, and this feeling of just like a battle is happening around you in a way that I have not seen really any Dynasty Warriors game capture to this magnitude. I have not felt this way about this game since maybe like Dynasty Warriors 3, 4, something like that. But you have these incredible moments of just these huge conflicts and clashes and like giant shield walls pushing forward and stuff like that feel so cool and work so well. Tactics that you can call in. You have like your own squad that you can say like mount up or cavalry charging into this flank, and you'll get like a bonus if you like position it correctly and things like that. And meanwhile, your character just has like twin pikes out and is spinning through the like battlefield, slashing through all these like random farmers that decided to pick up a sword that day. And then like an officer like stares you down and he's like, "You, Zeluan, face me." And you're like, "Let's go." And the seas part and you have like a duel. It's everything, like any sort of like, dream about like war epics and these big battles that you've had. This game captures it, and I cannot stress enough how much it rips. It's so good. But yeah, it's really interesting how they both double down on the big battles, the tactics, the bases, like the strategy of it, but also like the drama of it, and like how the action RPG stuff can feed into that. You have weapons that you can get better numbers for, you get better loot, you get better drops, you can attach different equipment, which like has always been a thing in Dynasty Warriors, but I think does feel a little bit different when you have this character that you're building up over a campaign and kind of piloting like a byleth through all of it. So like I would genuinely say, if you've ever been curious about Dynasty Warriors, this is the one to try.
Interesting that Koei Tecmo has become such a reliably great developer in recent years. Would not have expected that 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Nadia, what were we going to say?
I wanted to do Dragon Quest Builders 3.
Actually, yes, Nadia, we know.
I thought it reminded you again.
Thank you. No, Nadia's whole thing is every time, but what about Dragon Quest Builders 3?
But have we
Are we
thought
ever going to
about-
get that? I hope that, Nadia, I hope for your sake that we do get a Dragon Quest Builders 3 someday. That'd be really great.
Thank you.
As for Koei Tecmo, one of the unexpected highlights of that Xbox Developer Direct was the shadow drop of Ninja Gaiden 2 Black.
Yeah,
which
I hear great.
It's actually really good. It's a really high quality Unreal Engine 5 remake of Ninja Gaiden 2, and it has its problems, especially the camera. I was playing it the other day, but I was playing 4K 120 FPS. And I was just like, woo, this game cooks. Oh my gosh. It has real DMC vibes, classical DMC vibes, which I think is interesting. But but it's just fun to bounce around the walls as Ryu Hayabusa. But Koei Tecmo, they built up a really strong relationship with Nintendo and did such a good job of making these Musou games that were specifically around other other franchises. And then they've taken all those learnings over the years and applied them to the OG Dynasty Warriors. I mean, I've never been a Musou fan, but everything you're describing kind of makes me want to play this game, Eric. It's crazy.
Yeah, same.
I think it is like I see shades of especially Fire Emblem Three Hopes in Dynasty Warriors Origins, where you obviously have like the strategy stuff that really clicked well with Fire Emblem, and I even wish there was some aspects of that here in Dynasty Warriors Origins. I think in Three Hopes, that was where you could like tell your characters to say like, hey, I want you to go defend this base, or I want you to go attack this base. And I kind of wish you had that, because in Origins, one of the more frustrating things is that when you're trying to do some of the harder battles, like I just got used to like Chong-Pu is just going to die. Like that dude's not built for battle after like the halfway point in the Wu campaign. Like he's not meant for the field anymore, my dude. I don't know why you're out here. This is a young man's game. We've got like Gan Ning out there like slicing through with a pirate sword and stuff like that, and Chong-Pu's like, I'll help too. And it's like, no, dude, stay home. You're good. Like it's okay.
You can help by staying out of the way.
We've got so many other Huang guys over there. Like he's just cleaving through dudes like nothing, and like Chong-Pu is like fighting 3 farmers who's like, I'm in need of assistance, and you're like, no, dude, stop. So I just got used to him dying in every fight, but I wish you
makes
could
me
kind
think of
command...
Bradicus and Chaticus and the
yeah.
Anyway,
I wish you could command units around like that. But I think the other thing that they got from Three Hopes and other like doing other Musos spin-offs and stuff like that is the bond system, which like there isn't romance or anything, but Guan Yu does at one point tell the main character that they will spend the night etching each other's faces into their memories for all eternity.
Whoa.
So like that it gets a little steamy. It gets a little
that sounds a little
hot.
gay.
Yeah.
Gay.
Yeah, in the same way that the Fast and the Furious movies have undertones. But it's
so those are gay. Those are gay movies. I've never seen a Fast and Furious.
Oh yeah.
It depends.
Rock and Vin Diesel.
Who was the main character? Who was one of the main characters until Fast 7?
Are you talking about Paul Walker? Yeah.
Paul Walker.
Yeah.
Paul Walker's
Brian.
Character and Dom.
Yeah.
I was kind of made to watch a bunch of Fast and the Furious movies. I think I watched 1, 2, 5, and then the most recent one.
I love 5.
And yeah, the vibes, we're just best friends vibes, but we're clearly in love with one another between Dom and Paul Walker's character. Very strong, I think.
I sincerely love the Fast and Furious movies. They are incredible. I think if you like Yakuza, you like the Fast and the Furious. They're essentially the same. Like they're parallel works. And so I think if
formulaic, though.
If you like, yeah, but who cares? Like I legitimately Fast 5. I think if I had to make a top 25 movies of all time, Fast 5 might sneak on there, like right at the edge.
Fast 5 is amazing, actually.
It's so good.
It's a really impressive action movie.
Yeah, sure.
And the most recent Fast and the Furious tried real hard to capture the energy of it to varying success. But
it worked because they were still like criminals and they were still doing a heist. And like that works. I think the modern stuff almost turns into Mission Impossible, which, hey, that's another action movie series that's very, very good. But I
launched a car into space.
Yeah, they get a little too far with it. But Dynasty
it became
Warriors,
like Moonraker.
Dynasty Warriors, very good. It's really nice to see them get a dub. Like Dynasty Warriors 9 was such a flop that I think most people were concerned about what can Dynasty Warriors do to come back. And Koei Tecmo has even been out there saying like Origins is not necessarily, I think there's some concern about the fact that like, so there's not a lot of playable characters in the game. You have your main character and then you can like partner up with certain characters like Guan Yu, Huang Gai, Sun Shang, who can like be your companion characters and you can swap to them when you fill up a bar and things like that for like a hot minute. But it's not really like a game where you have this giant roster like you do in, say, Dynasty Warriors 8 Extreme Legends. And I think there's been some concern about that moving forward, but they have been out there basically saying like, we wanted to do something different. We knew we wanted to like see what Dynasty Warriors could be. And so I've been calling it like, it's the Arceus of Dynasty Warriors. It is, we tried something new because we needed to like break out of this formula. And I think by doing that, they have found a really compelling vision of what Dynasty Warriors can be moving forward. So I'm hopeful for somewhere down the line, either a Dynasty Warriors 10 or an Origins 2 or whatever, because Origins also cuts off about halfway through the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. It does not go all the way through the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. So there is like still story for them to tell down the line if they want to do that. But I think this is like the strongest foot forward the series has had since 8XL, and even more so than that. I think this is the strongest it's been since like the, I don't know, PS2 era. And it's great to see everybody just getting really excited about the Three Kingdoms and about Dynasty Warriors again. Is needed this.
We love the Three Kingdoms. Speaking of action games, Nadia, you've been playing Ys, Oath and Felghana, the remake. How is it?
Yeah, I'm not going to take up too much time here because there's not much to say beyond. It really is an action game, and I mean that in the best possible way. Like, it is definitely a PSP game blown up to HD. I regret not taking the Switch version because, man, you can see the tiles when you're on the PS5. But the basic Falcom gameplay loop is so satisfying. Like, just Adol moves so quickly, and I've noticed like you do have, of course, that Zelda aesthetic, but it's so different in that, number one, as I said, it's so much faster. You can jump and attack that way, and there's just, I think, less puzzling as well. It's more, whereas Zelda is more about like, yes, combat, but more puzzle. Ys, especially Oath and Felghana, is more combat, less puzzles, but they have both. But yeah, it's a very straightforward game. But if you just want like a pure hit of action, it's still so satisfying to play. It's hard. I'm playing on normal, and I'm thinking to myself, was it always this hard? Like, there's bosses that are kicking my ass, and I'm not gonna. God help me if I say it's like the Dark Souls of Ys I just did, but you do have to get used to like pattern recognition and countering appropriately.
Nadia, I on the B-roll, I have currently paused it, and I have it paused on a nobleman of some kind. Who is this man, and why is he so divorced? It is. I don't know who this man is, but he seems sad, and he seems like he's going to buy Twitter.
He's a bad king, and he's being controlled, or he's allied with. I can't remember the name of the count. It's his real name. I just know that he closed down the mines or this town in Felghana, and made everyone like poor and not working. And so there's one frustrated worker calls him Count McDumbass. That's the only name I remember for sure. But this guy,
he's got like a collared business shirt on, and like if you took away like the fluffy tie and the crown, he would just look like a disgruntled office worker, and I love that about him.
he looks like he hasn't bathed in a few days. Like his hair looks really limp.
Yes.
Yeah. He acts the way he looks. So not much surprise there.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Bad king.
We'll probably have more thoughts on Oath and Felghana soon. Not for nothing, we should really do an Ys Pantheon this year. That'd be a lot of fun.
Good.
I would love to do that.
Talking about action RPGs. Maybe we did try to do a Moso Pantheon, and we ended up doing Drakengard that one time.
I gotta stop like putting the funny option in there, because I've learned that the listeners of this pod, no matter how much they might say, "Oh, I can't believe we ended up with Sonic Chronicles. Can't believe we ended up with Drakengard." Y'all vote for it every time.
Somebody are hitting those buttons.
This is a democracy.
They do love it. People get so mad. But then the Drakengard episode was one of the best episodes. People loved it. So
I had a good time with the Drakengard episode. Thanks to our guests. Our guests made that a very good discussion and a very interesting topic to talk about.
All right, that's it for the tavern. Nadia, take us home.
We were talking about 2008, and actually not 2008, but we're talking about
2008.
Gears of War brought to mind. Actually, I just saw a news story this week about how physical media for games is in decline, like people buying less and less of it, obviously. But the peak for this graph that I saw was 2008. And that was the year I really started to get into my games writing career. Like, there was a lot going on with the Xbox 360, with the Wii. Mobile was kind of starting to ramp up. Like, smartphones were getting... I don't know if they were out by then. Was the iPhone out by 2008?
Yeah, the iPhone was out in 2007.
Oh, I think Canada came a little bit later. But either way, mobile games were starting to pick up. It was really exciting. And what I remember most from this time... Kat, I was wondering if you remember this, and Eric, you too. The commercials for games in that period were so good, and you don't see that anymore because cable doesn't really exist anymore, or it's a piece of crap. But do you remember, that was the year, 2008 was the year we got the Gears of War commercial, which is iconic. I would say that really, really helped its success. It has the Donnie Darko version of Mad World on it, which, fun fact, that movie was originally supposed to use the song MLK by U2. They couldn't get the rights, so they used that unique version of Mad World for a really sad scene in the movie. And they picked it for Gears of War, and it turned out to be a fantastic fit. Even I was like, holy crap, I should play that. I never did. That was also the year we got the commercial for BioShock. Remember the Under the Sea? Under the Sea? That was so good as well. And even, I think we also got Halo 3's commercial, which had that diorama, which apparently is somewhere, I don't know if a private buyer got it eventually, but it's still around. And just, I think I wrote articles about how good the commercials were in that era, and they just never got better. It was kind of like living in the 90s and being in like the golden age of music videos and looking at what the kids have to deal with now and saying, I'm so sorry. But yeah, you never really got better than that, I think, like for advertising on television. God, I mean, television advertising in general just kind of went to crap. I mean, do you remember, Kat, Eric, anything like that?
I was living in Japan at the time.
All right.
So I didn't really have access to American commercials, sadly.
You should look them up if you haven't. Some of the best. I totally recommend it.
My recollection of video game commercials mostly goes back to the days of the NES and the Super Nintendo, where I remember there was a Super Nintendo commercial where someone who's now quite famous, a famous actor, walks up to a giant screen,
right,
and starts playing F-Zero, and they're going, oh.
Yes, it was Keanu Reeves, was it? It was someone. You're right. It was someone famous.
Yeah.
But
remind
no, that was a
me.
great commercial.
There was also the Sega commercials that were trolling Nintendo. Like, there's the race car, the F1 race car that's going around the track, and it's welcome to the next level. And then it would show like a slow truck with Mario Kart on the back going, and then
Mario Kart
getting lapped by the race
Sega
car.
as a console developer, just put that out there.
Also, there were, back in the days of gaming magazines when they existed, there were a lot of very weird and gnarly, kind of gross out ads. That was one of the problems. That was one of the problems that Earthbound faced, was that they went all in on gross out humor with Earthbound, which I don't really associate with gross out
Paul
humor.
Rudd, and it was Zelda. Hold on, I'm pulling this up for the stream.
Oh, Paul Rudd.
Paul Rudd Zelda commercial. Don't worry.
I thought it was F-Zero.
It is. Yo, that's Paul Rudd. That's crazy. Okay, hold on. This is
Zelda. I'm talking about the one where whoever it was puts the game into they're playing in a parking lot for some godforsaken reason, and he puts it in. Holy crap! Cartridges.
Oh my god! And then like a whole crowd shows up behind him, I think.
Yeah, like where did you come from? And there's all boys. By the way,
this is Paul Rudd. There's Sim City. There's Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. There's some sort of hang glider game. There is F-Zero. F-Zero was on it.
Some sort of hang glider game like Pilot Wings?
Yeah,
Pilot
probably.
Wings.
Yeah. Now you're playing with power.
OG.
Yeah. Yeah.
Superpower.
Incredible.
That was a good slogan.
I loved the Japanese Super Nintendo commercials, specifically the Zelda Dance Number commercial
Zelda Dance Number was
with
iconic.
Hot Girl Link rescuing Zelda.
There's also
Very
Hot Girl
cool.
Samus in the Super Metroid commercial for Japan, as I recall.
There's also really good.
Yeah.
I think was it Mario RPG maybe that had a really good like musical number with it.
A surprising number of commercials for games did not get up to Canada, but we did have unique ones. Like for NHL '95, I think it was, where Ty Domi beats the shit out of a figure skater.
Yo, Link's dad in the back is getting it. He is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they aired that
down.
in America, but probably not as much as they aired it in Canada. I remember someone complained to the Toronto Star about that commercial.
To the extent that I see commercials outside of YouTube and streaming platforms now, I mostly see them when I'm watching sports. And the only time I see commercials, really, I don't see Nintendo or Xbox commercials, but I do see the occasional PlayStation commercial where often it'll be, maybe these are older ones, where someone is basically in a game world, like a couple of kids are running around in a game world. It's like, wow, you're in the game. It's in the game. That's the PlayStation 4 commercials. They're not particularly memorable, as it were, but But Nadia, we were just speaking of the mid 2000s. We were just talking about 2005 on Retronauts together.
That's right. You and I, we were there. It was a good episode.
With Bob,
I think it just went up. Is it for patrons only?
It is patrons only, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
you should buy it and watch.
A lot of people who subscribe to Blood God are also Retronauts fans, so
we should have a bundle.
Yeah. Oh, that would be. We should. I wonder if that's possible. Is that a thing?
I don't know. You can make it a way.
Can you do that? Can you bundle with other podcasts?
Good idea.
Is this a special bundle where you end up splitting it? But like I said, so many Retronaut subscribers are also already on Axe of the Blood God. I asked, how did you find Axe of the Blood God? And a lot of people said, I found you through Retronauts.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
And that's it for this week's episode of Axe of the Blood God. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for the show. Once again, if you like the show and you want to get it ad-free, patreon.com/bloodgodpod. The $5 level, you get access to the premium version of our newsletter. You get access to the show ad-free, and there's lots more content besides that. You can also vote in the upcoming votes for the Side Quest and Pantheon episodes. We're heading now into the Axe of the Blood God post-show with our Stars of Destiny, and this week we're joined by Anthrax Beads, Azixa, Criminal Justice, Drew RWX, Flashback 2012, Harvest Lunatic, Laguna Matana 124, Lord Bob Bree, Robo Riley, Spooky Man BR, and Teeps. So we're going to go hang out with them. If you want to do that, subscribe to the Stars of Destiny over on Patreon. And we do a live version of the show every week on Twitch at twitch.tv/bloodgodpod. Like and subscribe. All right, that's it for this week's episode. I've been your host, Kat Bailey. Thank you so much for listening. And for Nadia, Eric, and myself, we'll see you next week. And happy adventuring.